two other data sources that I'm aware of. So if you go to homefinder.com, which is, I don't know who is responsible for that.
Well, actually, no, on your Windows 2, this is the new one.
Anyway, all of my accounts by zip code, whereas the city has it by historical.
There it went black.
So it's, it's a different way of looking at it. Well, anyway, when you look at as of last week, there are almost 1,650 properties for sale.
There.
Forward.
And backwards.
When
Beautiful.
we're done, I just want to close it and log off.
Sure.
Because I'll be back here in about 45 minutes for tonight.
I'll do a shutdown or restart on it if you want. Okay, we'll do.
'Cause if you take these three categories together,
You're welcome.
7% of the cities.
Good job, guys. Thank you.
70% of the listings.
Can you hang on a second, sir? I want to give Mark.
There's just one more.
Yeah.
Do committee meetings secure these days? Committee meetings.
Okay.
One last thing, Director of Equalization Office, this is where this data comes from. Vargas Leader has a southwoodinfo.com, and they list just home sales daily, and this goes back only to 2010. But so far in 2010, there are 125,000 to do a ratio of what the, you know, I'm going to do this by zip code of what the, you know, just the average sale price to the assessed value is to see what the, you know, the bank has lost. But from a public policy perspective, there's only a small number that, according to the, since part of what you're doing is cross-referencing stuff with you know, the county property tax, you know, you're supposed to be able to pay your back, but you can also use it as a source to get the building or the land for the total assessed. You know,
Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Services Committee meeting. It will start in 5 minutes. If you have not already done so, please sign in on the table. We need it for the records. Thank you very much. If any city staff would like to be acknowledged in the minutes, you can sign as well. Thank you.
so far is from the South Dakota Mortgage Bankers Association of delinquency rates statewide. As far as showing that it's a lag variable by drawing through by quarter, when the recession started, the recession ended, and where the peaks are. Well, I just think at some point it would be worthwhile for us to explain what he's doing with the data, because he's contributing, giving it to the police and fire department, because they maintain all this stuff on the foreclosed homes, vacant properties. I just want to be part of this, as far as
Hey, Kenny,
the city is concerned.
he had a 46-slide presentation.
Just
Mine's 66.
whether the water has been.
Dude.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
What did you do to your ribs that you have to sit on yourself?
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Public Services Committee. The meeting will start in 30 seconds.
Calling this meeting of the Public Services Committee, Monday, March 14th, to order. The first agenda item will be review and approval of minutes dated February 14th, 2011. I'll need a motion to approve that, please.
Move to approve, Aguilar.
Second, Urbanbach.
Okay, we got a motion to approve and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that goes 4-0. All right, our next item will be executive orders, and I would like Deborah Owen to lead off with that, please.
Thank you. And before you is a draft. It's been under review by the committee for several months, but in this state it has been at least for 2. But before you is the idea of having council clarify that executive orders are to be used by the mayor. In part, those are authorized by charter. Those sections are stated in the ordinance now. And then council also has allowed that executive orders be used for purposes not stated in charter, which is to set rules and regulations for the employees of the mayor. And so that is the ordinance before you in section 2-35. And then also in 2-37 is simply effort by the council to clarify that the mayor, of course, can use executive orders to give his organizational chart for the departments under his subject and control. That's it.
Thank you. Any comments from the committee? Councilman Urbanbach?
I just wanted to add that this has been something that has been really important to several of us all along, and so I appreciate how the language is cleaned up, and it really does serve us well, I think, in this way. Do you want me to go ahead and report on the committee that's been working on this?
Yes, please.
In kind of response to that same concern that brought about the cleaning up of the ordinance, we pulled together sort of, I keep calling it an ad hoc group. It was Human Resources Director Bill O'Toole, David Fifley, the City Attorney, it was Deborah Owen, City Clerk, Councilor Rolfing, and myself. We met and basically went page by page through the executive orders, and I asked the clerks to provide a copy for each of the members of the committee to just see the working list that City Attorney Fifley created for us. Some of the issues that we found were basically just ideas that are set in executive order but perhaps should be written as ordinance as well, because the public needs to understand how city employees are going to react based on executive order. Some of them are just simply things that we're going to ask do we really need them? Do they really need to be executive orders? And so you'll see if you run through that list, it was a really positive. We met 2 different times on Friday afternoons for a couple of hours each time, and it was a positive experience. It was a great dialogue back and forth, and really educational for all of us to do that page by page. As I said to Councilor Anderson earlier today, this is something that will continue on, and eventually there will be council action on some of these items as they become proposed ordinances. You'll see them come before us as legislation.
Thank you, Councilman. Okay. Any other comments? Comments from the public or the administration? Okay, do we have any motion on to move this back to the council, or?
I would like to move that we do take these ordinance revisions and move them ahead as they are, as they're noted in our packet today. Move them to council with a due pass.
Second Aguilar.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4 vote with that. Okay, moving forward, our next agenda item is the changes into the pawn shop ordinance that our Sioux Falls Police Department has been working on with the pawn dealers. Do we have someone from the administration? Chief Bartel would like to speak on this.
Good evening, Doug Barthel, Police Chief. Just briefly, would like to introduce the work that we've been doing on this. First off, just like you to keep in mind that the reason that we have the pawn ordinance is to help us recover stolen property, and it also helps, that in turn helps deter crime, because we don't provide an easy outlet for people to get rid of their stolen goods. So our main goal in this is not to create more bureaucracy and create a lot of regulations for people to follow. In the end, all we want to do is to be able to put everybody on the same playing field, and if there's possible stolen property that's being unsuspectingly purchased by other stores that aren't going through this reporting process, that we can then hopefully get that recovered and back into the proper owners. So I've got several members of our staff that have been working on this for quite some time. As you know, this came out of the audit that was done on our pawn buyback fund some time ago, but we had actually been working on an ordinance revision prior to that, so this actually fell into place very well with that recommendation that came out of the audit. So along with our staff and working with our legal advisor, we developed some revisions. We've met several times at different shops and came up with what we think is a good compromise and a good solution. And with that, I'm going to introduce Captain Greg Vandekamp. He's the commander of our detective division. He's the one that's been spearheading this effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg Vandekamp, Sioux Falls Police Department Captain, overseeing our investigations. Before I get started, real quick, I'd like to introduce a couple of people that I have taken along that's been working hand in hand with me on this ordinance. First of all, Sergeant Matt Burns. If I have to call upon him specifically to urge our processes, I'll do that. And then also Keith Allenstein from the City Attorney's Office, who office is just outside of mine, has been assisting. And I see I have a whole lot of supporters out there, so that's good too. And we'll get started with this. The question is how we got there. As you're well aware, and Chief Barthel said this, we started this process quite some time ago with our own internal audit of current policies, procedures, practices, including the ordinances, and looking at them and how they meshed between businesses. After we started that process, an external audit was requested from the council. The audit committee went through that process and identified a lot of the same things that we were already working on, or in some cases things we had already had things put in place on. Out of this, right behind this, we had an initial ordinance draft using members of the Sioux Falls Police Department. We also used the City Attorney's Office, and then we also did a lot of input and research from other cities, law enforcement agencies from in the region to what they were doing currently in their communities. Following our draft, we then established public input meetings for those businesses that would be affected by these changes, which includes precious metal and gem dealer, secondhand goods dealers, pawn shops, etc. We held 2 initial meetings. We sent letters out to all the affected businesses that we could think of, and invited them to one of those 2 meetings, seeking input and feedback from them on the ordinance. We did receive a number of ideas, questions, concerns from them. We weeded our way through those, and we incorporated those that we felt were legitimate and that needed addressing. We then we put together what we call the final draft. We held one more follow-up meeting, again inviting all those same businesses to show up, and sought public feedback again from those. After that meeting, we were prepared to do the final draft as presented to you today. Okay. The public input, just to show you some of the ideas that came out of that. Question about gun shows and gun dealers, how we would work with them. That is a pretty big part of Sioux Falls, South Dakota in general. So we came up with a solution for that. Precious metals and gems bullion purchases, large purchases. That was a very legitimate concern for them, having to hold a very large amount of precious metals in a very fluctuating market for a period of 14 days. We addressed that. Trade issues against purchases, people that would trade used items for new items. We addressed that, and we actually exempted those. License fees, there was a different licensing fee for pawn shops, precious metals and gems, so actually some didn't even have licensing fees. And then we did some minor wording changes at the request of some of the businesses. Key ordinance changes, and we'll just briefly go over these. I'm not going to go over the ordinance line by line. If you have any questions afterwards, we certainly can do that. Point 1, it covers pawnbrokers, secondhand goods dealers, gun dealers, and dealers in precious metals and gems, all under the same ordinance and subject to the same regulations and reporting standards, leads online, and defines secondhand good dealer. It limits police department hold period to a maximum of 90 days unless extended by the court order. If the held item is not seized as evidence within the 90-day period, the hold expires by ordinance and the business is free to transact. Again, that came out of, that was one of those that we recognized as a problem internally, even before the pawn audit. The pawn audit showed that we needed to tighten up that procedure as well. We put a number of things in place, including a document that we actually give to the affected businesses saying this is on hold. We also have recommended within the ordinance change a 90-day period that if we do not come back to them, as it was indefinite before, that they can just release the item and they can go ahead and transact it. Point 3, after holding period of purchase, alter holding period of purchase articles from 72 hours, gold, precious metals, and gems except coins, and 10 days, all other items, from receipt of item to 14 days for all items from the date the required records are received by the police department or designee. Put in plain terms is that all these different hold periods are all 14 days, and that's from the date that they actually make the entry into leads online. So it was from the date we received the records. You know, we had pawn cards. Well, now it's, if they make an entry on day 1, it's 14 days the clock starts. If they decide to wait 5 days, make the entry, it's 14 days from then. One of the reasons we did that, especially under secondhand goods, we realized that there's a lot of items going through secondhand stores that actually were items that of interest to us, that actually were stolen items. So we wanted to bring secondhand goods dealers under that. And 14 days was a date that we came up with doing research nationwide, actually. Regionally, this is actually still a very low period. Nationwide, it's a low period. Nationwide, the average is 30 days on all pawned items. Even in South Dakota, we're on the low end of that, but we do feel confident that with leads online, it's 14 days from the date of entry. That'll give us time as an agency to go ahead and look at that record, see if it is an item of interest for us, and still do our business. Yet it gives the businesses the benefit of the doubt of 2 less weeks of holding on to an article. 4th point, holding period exempted for firearms provided the purchase, receipt, and sale of the firearms are done by anyone required by the federal law to have a federal firearms license, an FFL. That came out of the gun shows question. How are we going to handle gun shows? So we looked at a number of different ways to do that, including exempting gun shows from reporting, but that would certainly not serve the purpose either. So what we did is we just exempted the holding period. They still have to report those transactions to us. Pawn shops are the same way. If a pawn shop has an FFL, Federal Firearms License, they too would be exempted from that hold period. So that's the other thing we want to do. We wanted to try to make it as fair as possible across the board for all businesses that are affected. So the gun shows are still able to function, and the pawn shops receive the benefit of that. The reason that is that under federal firearms licensing, they actually have to track where the gun goes as well, so we can always track that gun down, but it doesn't shut our gun shows down. Last one, all regulated businesses shall make the items available for inspection by police during the holding period during normal business hours. Currently, the ordinance reads just the records are available. This is an administrative thing that we're asking. One of the issues that we have seen in the past were that the pawn records were not exactly matching the pawned items. We require make, model, serial number, and any other identifying marks, including, if it's very obvious, it's colored, painted, whatever. If I got my initials GVK in the side, we would ask that that's on that pawn record. What this does, it gives us the ability to check to make sure that the items that are being pawned or sold to secondhand goods stores are accurately reflected into the pawn ticket themselves. If we have continued issues, then we have some recourse through the City Council to say, hey, we have a business that is uncooperative in this. This is the document that was put into place so that we do not lose track of of items that have been placed on a hold through law enforcement. We give a copy, if requested, to the business that clearly states the hold date, the start date, the detective that took the property, the case number, their ticket number, the business, and then the serial number or the item description. The other thing is a restitution form. We fill this out whenever we seize an item. We will send this over with the case. This is actually printed on a pink piece of paper so that the state's attorney's office knows that there was an item taken, knows that there was restitution that should be ordered on behalf of the businesses. It actually includes those drop-down boxes, and we have all the businesses in Sioux Falls that will be affected already listed in there. But that is how we hope that the state's attorney's office will continue cooperating through this process as we start disposing of the property once a case has been disposed of in court. Questions?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
Just taking a look through here right now. I guess number one thing, when you're going to put these items on hold, the items will stay at the business, correct? On hold until you come with a court order?
That is not correct. No. No, the hold document is a way in which there are times that people will make a report through the police department and not have all the necessary numbers. Okay, a lot of people take some time to say, hey, I got the serial number, a better description, whatnot. What that hold document is that if we feel and we're going through the ticket saying, hey, this looks like this very well could match that property, and we're not able to verify it at that point due to the lack of the numbers, the owner's not accessible to us or whatnot, we can go to the store and say, hey, we're putting a hold on this item. We feel that this could be related to a case. This could be stolen property. That starts the clock on the 90 days, okay? If we, in fact, have probable cause to believe that that is a stolen item, we can say, here's a description from the homeowner, here's a description from the owner of that property, and it clearly matches that item that's at the store. No, we will seize that item as stolen property, and we will actually put that into our evidence storage.
And then one other question here, and that is on section 2815. Excuse me. Thank you, Tamara. And it would be addendum C. A copy of records required shall be provided in a manner prescribed by the chief of police or his designee. How are the the copy's going to be produced? Is it going to be a paper copy, electronic copy?
I don't
Since you
have
use
it in front of me. I
Leads
believe they're referring to Leads Online.
That's what I was getting
Yeah.
to. Are you going?
Yep.
Can
Yep.
we say Leads Online in here, since that is what we're using at this time?
Well, we don't want to lock ourselves into one company. There are a number, Pawn Tracker, Leads Online. There's a number of companies. This is not something new. This is a national database that's out there. There's a number of companies that have such. We have a 3-year contract, I believe it is, with Leads Online. So at the end of that time, if there's something that's better, functionally easier for us, maybe even cheaper, we can then move towards that company. So that is just, if we feel going back to pawn cards would be the appropriate way, well, that would be the designated way. So
Okay.
we want to keep that open, generic terms.
Councilman Brown.
Greg, I think you've answered this for me, but just for the sake of the discussion, how does this not affect antique stores and buyers?
If you would go to the definition of a secondhand goods store, because that's really what they would fall under. And it could, depending what they purchase. But very clearly under secondhand goods dealer on page 3, bottom, it says who buys, sells, deals, or takes in trade the following secondhand goods, and then lays out. So if they would transact in any one of those things, they would be. But let's say I take in a box of 300 doilies, that would be an exempted transaction.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you, Greg. Okay, do we have any comments or questions from the public?
Hi, Dean Nacer. I'm a lawyer, and I'm representing a number of businesses. I'm not representing the businesses themselves as much as my clients, my immediate clients are Sunset Pawn and Sunset Strip Pawn, but there are a number of people that they have authorized me to speak on behalf of today. Now, we're not going to go into a lot of detail at this time. We want to voice our opposition to the present form of this ordinance. It goes too far. It's frightening, quite frankly. Between the lines, you will see that it totally does away with the warrant requirements in any of these businesses. And it allows the police to make the determination as to whether it's a stolen item or probably a stolen item, and it allows the police to then seize that item without a warrant. And it's an interesting way of looking at this ordinance that the city has, and I've been corresponding with Mr. Allenstein about his interpretation. And there's a state statute that says that you have to present a stolen item to the owner for display. And that display is undoubtedly for the purpose of determining the identification of the item. And then that state law would allow that owner to go commence a legal proceeding. And they couldn't seize the item. They would have to commence a legal proceeding. One of the things that we're concerned with is that the police are determining that they are the agents of that owner, and without any authority to that effect. So they're coming in and they believe they've got a right to see these items and to seize those items because they're also police. And we think that goes way too far. Now, this ordinance is overbroad in that it addresses not only stolen items, but items that are not stolen, the vast majority of them. Pawnbrokers, for example, are responsible for only less than 0.5% of all fenced items. There's a few items a year that might end up at a pawn shop. And it never used to be that way. It was more intensive in the years past. But with the advent of the internet, we've got a lot of people fencing their items there because, as the chief said, part of of the effect of having regulations like this is that it discourages people from using pawn shops and secondhand stores and such. But the important part about that is that we are, in this ordinance, requiring a huge, expensive burden of record keeping to be placed on these businesses and reporting, not just record keeping, but reporting of innocent transactions, which is the vast majority of them. And those transactions go directly into Leads Online, a private, unregulated entity. And that isn't right. We think it violates the Privacy Act, the federal Graham-Bliley Privacy Act. We think that it violates our clients' constitutional rights to have privacy in their businesses. We think it violates the rights of the people who are innocent and honest who do business with them to have everything reported to an agency, to have their most private information and addresses and identifying information given to an agency other than the police. We think that the proper thing is for the police to get a probable cause warrant if they need one. Now, there are many things that are somewhat offensive that can be worked out as we work with the police and as we work with the city to try to get a better ordinance. We look forward to doing that. But please do not get the idea that that the businesses that I represent and the interests that I represent are in favor of this ordinance as written. This ordinance is far overreaching. It is not what you want. It may be a convenience to the police. It is a convenience to the police, but it is not what we want in this city. And so I look forward to working with you, and my clients look forward to working with you to pare this back a little bit and make it reasonable. In saying that, we very much appreciate what the police do. I personally very much appreciate what the police do. We are not trying to inhibit law enforcement, but there has to be a balance. There's got to be a balance between people's rights and law enforcement's ability to enforce the law. We think this goes too far, and we'd like to see it pared back. We look forward to working with everybody. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Naser. Any other public comments? Okay. A motion on this item?
First.
Councilman Urfenbach?
Question first. What's our timeline? Where are we headed with this?
I could probably speak.
Okay, Deborah?
I think today it's not an action item. It's just for review, and that council will take this input from the public and then come back to your next committee meeting. I think internal audit will also give you some input regarding this in relation to their audit and their recommendations a month from today. I don't know that there is an expectation to get it out of committee. I don't know if there's an expectation by the committee to get it out of committee. I just know that that we're beginning discussion on that.
I would like some time to review this and have time for our audit department also to review this and be able to take the public comment at the time when we actually have the time to take those kind of comments from the businesses so that we can move forward on this.
Well, I don't want to argue. I just am trying to make this make sense in my own mind. I'm trying to process this. My understanding is the police department has been working on this not just for the last few months, but actually for years, off and on. It's been a process over a long period of time. So now my concern is that they're at a point where they're really comfortable with it, but we've got a group of folks that are not. And so are we? I'm just asking procedurally, are we going to send this back to, go back to the drawing board or come to compromise before you come back to us, or are we going to draw that compromise? What do you think, Councilor Anderson?
I think it's going to come back to us, and it will be on our shoulders to try to come up with a compromise on this.
Okay.
And I said I would like to, I guess for my own opinion on this is I would like us to review this with our audit group who spent the time to audit the pawn shop dealers and how this operates, and also working with our city attorneys to see if we can meet with these owners of these businesses affected and try to find out what those differences are and how we can try to eliminate those concerns.
Good, thank you.
Councilman Brown?
I should have asked this question earlier, but it came to my mind now. So I would like to hear again from Mr. Nacer, and then if the captain could also address the. Mr. Nacer, you said that it's overreaching on the administration, the daily operations of it, the paperwork. How are you foreseeing that it's overreaching on that? And Greg, I'd like to hear from you on how you envision that it would work.
There's a number of ways in which it's overreaching, but first of all, you need to see where it extends to. Mr. Entenman was sitting there a while back. If you read the definition of secondhand goods, it includes electronic devices, and every single motorcycle he sells and takes in on trade is an electronic device now. There's no question that it extends beyond what is envisioned. There are businesses, small mom and pop businesses, that are going to have to be keyed in electronically to this leads online. And there isn't any need for it. There's no demonstration that there is any more theft going on with pawn shops than jewelry stores, than anything else. Many kinds of businesses that take things in on trade. And so we need to better identify what it should apply to, first of all. I don't know why bicycles are listed as, and not motorcycles. But they do list electronic devices. What isn't an electronic device today? And so that's one thing. The area that it covers, the secondhand dealers and so forth. The reporting requirements, to be honest with you, one of my clients told me, I don't mind that so much. I don't mind reporting. They don't have perhaps volume like some people have. Some people have a lot of volume, and this requires you to put a tag on everything, to put the identifying things on it, whether it's ever going to be a suspect item or not. No matter what the demonstration of ownership is, you tag it, and we all know that because there is probable cause to think, or possible cause to think, that something might be stolen, that doesn't mean that it is. And I want to give you an example. One of my clients had an item seized by the police this week, and that item was seized without a warrant. That item was not a stolen item, if you view theft in the classical sense. It was an item that was sold by a jeweler to an individual on credit. Because the man beat the jeweler out of the item, and intended to beat him out of the item, and default on his credit, that item was surrendered to that, we'll call him a thief, to that dishonest person. That item doesn't have any identifying information on it. It was then given to the pawnbroker. The pawnbroker did not know about the background transaction that took place. And so the pawnbroker now paid $900 for an item that the police seized, and apparently, and I haven't received the accounting I've asked for yet, but they gave it back to this jeweler. Now, the legal title to that property has been transferred, and according to some pretty solid case law, it's not a stolen item, even though the man pleaded on a plea bargain to a theft by deception. There's an old law that says a thief can pass no title. That law did not apply to frauds. Our modern laws now, theft by deception, do apply to frauds, but it doesn't apply to a defrauded theft. It only applies to a clandestinely taken theft where the owner did not entrust the item to the individual. So I'm going to be faced on behalf of this client with now finding where that item is and trying to recover it from an equally innocent citizen, perhaps not quite as innocent as we are, but innocent. And so the police played judge and jury, and that's consistent with what we've been allowing them to do in a transaction like this. We want this ordinance to avoid problems like that. We want accountability built into it. We want, when an item is seized, we want to know where it is and a required accounting. We don't want these transactions being thrown into the abyss of the criminal law system where the one it's seized from is not even a party. All right, so I'm getting into some details as to why this is non-protective and overbroad, but I'm doing my best to answer that question as best we can. Other ways that it is overbroad. It does not screen out probable cause. It doesn't tell, it doesn't pass the probable cause determination through the courts, and it bypasses the Constitution. Under this rule, the way it's being interpreted, according to Mr. Allenstein, there is never a need for a warrant. On an item they think is stolen, there is never a need for a warrant. It bypasses the courts. That, to us, is unconstitutional. There are restrictions on pawn dealers and secondhand dealers that are legitimate in excess of that imposed on the general public. That's a recognized thing in the law, but we don't think it should dispense with warrant requirements. And it leaves too much discretion in the hands of the authorities. And so there is that. Overbroad, there undoubtedly are many other aspects to this ordinance, but I think that by and large, by my saying that it's overbroad, we mean we're not totally opposed to this kind of regulation. We mean we are citizens that recognize what the police have to do. We are honest citizens. We don't think all innocent customers should be treated the same as criminals and their privacy information put into databases that are not even police databases. Okay? That's the overbroadness of the ordinance that we think we need to address. All right. Thanks.
There's quite a bit said there, so it's hard for me to address every item that's there, and I might even call Keith Allenstein up here from the city attorney's office and their standpoint or their take on some of the things that were said. First of all, a motorcycle would be a very poor example because a motorcycle is actually a motor vehicle as covered by state law, and it's subject to those reportings and whatnot. Yes, a lot of things are electronic devices. A trumpet would not be an electronic device. If I go to a pawn shop, or I go second-hand dealer, rather, pawn shops have to report everything. But I go to a second-hand dealer and I sell a trumpet, I guess I wouldn't have to report that. But if I was to sell a Garmin, a cell phone, iPod, and the list goes on and on. Those are those commonly stolen items, and that's why if you look at that list, we really try to just narrow it to those items that we see as commonly stolen and resold property. Mr. Nace referred to a jewelry store issue. That was not an issue of poor credit. That was an issue of somebody lying to establish credit. It was truly a theft by deception. The other kicker to that is I know that Mr. Nacer was informed by City Attorney Keith Allenstein that we were in possession of that property. That property is not being released to anybody pending a court order. We possess that property. We don't make that property determination. We rely on the courts to make that property determination. So we don't grab property and make our own determination, say, here, you take it. We wait for the courts to say, restitution ordered here, property belongs to the owner. And I do agree with Mr. Nacer that there is a little bit of an issue in items that may be theft by deception as to clearly stolen items. That is something that they'll have to work out, through the court system. I agree that That's not going to be a clear and easy fix, but again, we're not making that property determination. We're relying on the courts to make that property determination for us, and we continue to work with the state's attorney's office and Judge Caldwell, as a matter of fact, to try work that process out. That wouldn't be so burdensome to the victims of crime and to the businesses as well. The 0.5% is a number that's thrown out there for the items that are at pawn shops. Again, that is verified stolen items. I understand that's a low number. Again, those are verified stolen items. So there is obviously more items that pass through that law enforcement is never aware or victims are not able to trace. So that number is higher. Even at 0.5%, an example would be a business in town informed us that they passed 23,000 items in a 2-week period. Well, if you use the less than 0.5% over a year, if you carry that 26 times, 26 2-week periods, that's 2,080 items potentially that would be stole. So that number could be potentially rather high. So we do regulate those items. Keith, would you like to speak on the seizing of property, probable cause, issues that were brought up?
Keith Allenstein, Assistant City Attorney. Mr. Nacer and I have had some correspondence, and a lot of the things he talks about are procedural. One of the things we have to be careful with in this ordinance is there are Fourth Amendment concerns. There are arguments where the Fourth Amendment requires a warrant. There are arguments where the Fourth Amendment does not require a warrant. If you've ever, police seize, search things every day without a warrant, okay? Those are all handled in the court system. Those are all handled under the Fourth Amendment. We don't need to address necessarily every procedural aspect of the searching and seizing in this ordinance. The overreaching that it applies to all kinds of legitimate transactions. We concede that of the verified items that are stolen that go through pawn shops, the number that's been thrown out by the Pawnbrokers Association is 0.5%. That may be, but pawn shops are what are considered and secondhand stores and gun dealers a highly regulated business, and as such, they're subject to administrative regulation. And what we need to remember here, as we continue these discussions, we're not inventing a wheel here. These are ordinances that mirror ordinances across this nation, and in many respects are much less stringent. So there may be procedural questions. As far as the disposal of evidence, that's already handled in our state statute. Okay, when evidence is seized as part of a criminal proceeding, which is the only reason the police are seizing property is for a criminal proceeding, there are state statutes that deal with how to dispose of that. Perhaps, and I know I've heard stories from some of the pawn shops that in the years past, these may not have been complied with. Okay, I've set in motion procedures that we're now doing that. Okay, and I can assure, just as Captain Vandekamp said, the example that Mr. Nacer gave, we have not played judge and jury and turned over that property. We still hold that property, and we're awaiting one of two sides to get that in front of a court to do that, because that's what statute requires, and we have set forth procedures. I think Councilmember Anderson, I sent you a copy of the letter and those things, the procedure that we're starting to follow now. So. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith. The last thing I'd just like to say about this is the last thing we wanted to do is take an adversarial approach to this ordinance. So we spent a considerable amount of time trying to find what's best for, the Sioux Falls Police Department, how we can track this property, make cases, what's best and not overly burdensome for pawn shops, how they can comply with these things without having an undue burden on them and their businesses, as well as what's best for the citizens of Sioux Falls. What's fair, what's right in what they expect to receive stolen property back. So I know it may sound like there was a little bit of a headbutting, but again, we've been trying to be as transparent to this process as we could be, seeking as much input as we can, utilizing the suggestions given to us by the businesses as best we could, and we hope to remain that way. And we encourage, obviously, this committee to do the same, is to be.
Captain, just tell me how many businesses we're talking about? Can you guess in Sioux Falls?
We have 70 that would be affected by this ordinance. We sent out 42 letters. I'm sorry, 42 letters that we sent out that we see as potentially affected by this business or by this ordinance change.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Deborah Owen. This ordinance is put together. It was assigned to this committee last Monday, and there are issues that the council wanted specifically to address in terms of Robert's Rules of Order. And I just had a question before, from a council member. So before we start, let's just start. There is one section of ordinance that is not in here because we're not proposing a revision to it, but it is 2-13, where it states, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, latest edition, shall govern the proceedings of the council in all cases unless they are in conflict with this article. And there's only one area that I'm aware of in terms of this ordinance revision before you that we don't use Roberts, and it has to do with the motion to reconsider. And there's some good reasons for that in terms of how long sometimes our council meetings are in between motions, or in between meetings, if you have a motion to reconsider on an item that has failed. But if I could, I think we'll just begin and kind of walk through it. This is a working draft. It's really meant for input from now, both by council and the public, and the city attorney's office. He was given this prior to, and I think has some comments, but I'm not quite sure. Anyway, just to begin, we have some language cleanup and some things that council staff had looked at for some time now, in terms of kind of bringing this up to date with what council is doing. So we'll start with section 2-3, where it says official city council meetings, and then it just has some language cleanup where all meetings should be of the city council, shall be open to the public unless closed pursuant to state law. And then we added the term in subsection B of at the Carnegie Town Hall. We wanted to make sure we have a regular meeting is a specific meeting in terms of Robert's Rules, and that's always your first meeting of the month. But then in terms of a veto override, we wanted that deemed as a regular meeting, and so that language was added. In subsection C, we simply added city to city council, and in subsection D, again adding city to city council. And then we wanted to make sure that the city clerk's office is the one who will provide the written notice to the council, whether it's either by mail or by email or by facsimile of any change of the meeting, other than that's been established in this section of ordinance. And then in subsection E, again, to just simply add the term city to city council. And then moving on to 2-4, again, adding the term city to city council in this section. But then also there, if you'll notice, there's a higher duty of notice provided to council. And in this situation, that is in part because that would be called a non-scheduled meeting. It would be a special called meeting. And so it would fit outside of your regular calendared meetings in a year. So there's a higher duty there. We added by email as well. But we also have that written notice left at the council member's place of residence. And so that's that section. Just some housekeeping measures there. And then in section 2-5, we have, some time ago, council used to have briefing meetings, and I think it was in a former Mayor Hansen's office, actually, from way back. This is just updating this ordinance to reflect that you have informational meetings, but you also have working sessions of the council. And it just adds the language to talk about when the council has scheduled those informational meetings. And then, of course, all of our agendas will be available at least 24 hours notice to the public and the council. And then we just have working sessions of the council being held as needed. Often we give that notice. The council will determine when they need that. So we don't have regularly scheduled meetings for that. And then we have that the council chair shall preside at all informational meetings and working sessions of the council. In the council chair's absence, the council vice chair shall serve as the presiding officer. And that is something that the council does now. We just wanted to bring that language up to date in the ordinance. And then section 2-5.1, this is primarily moved from a different section. If you go to the very back of this, you'll see that we struck that in 2-26.2. It was this, for some reason, this portion was under like the boards and commissions and meetings of the city, and I really felt it belonged in the city council section, so it was moved. And so it just says the council shall establish an audit committee. That is added from the previous ordinance, a fiscal committee, a land use and development committee, a public services committee as standing committees of the council. The council chair and vice chair shall appoint members of the committee and shall designate the committee chair for each committee who shall serve as the presiding officer. And again, that is what the council does now. So we put that language in there to update the ordinance. And again, with minutes in section 2-7, we've added. Yes. Sorry.
Can we do questions as we go along? Is that all right with you?
Let's do. Yes.
I just have, this is my one question, and you just talked about the paragraph, and it is that definition of what the committees do. In the previous ordinance, it outlined just briefly that standing committees of the council serve in a research and advisory capacity. And I didn't know if the committee would be okay with leaving that description in there, or if we want to take that description out for a reason. Do we want to assume what a committee does, or do we want to outline it more clearly? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, and the reason why I took that out is because you do sometimes serve as a research in that capacity, but also you do take action. If an item is referred to the committee, you will take action, and you may amend that ordinance and then send it back for its second reading. And so I wanted to just leave that to however you wanted it to be. If you wanted to have that in there in addition to that you do take, if you will, formal action in a committee. Those are all noticed to the public, though, whether or not you have a quorum. Those have always been noticed since 2006 forward. But what is the will of the committee on that section?
Yes, that was my question, was how do we feel about that? Do we want to just leave it fluid? I'm fine with that if that's what the group wants to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we could let it, at this point, remain fluid.
Yeah, I like that idea too.
Okay.
Please continue.
All right, 2-7 under minutes. Just simply clarifying that those are kept in the city clerk's office rather than with just the city clerk. We also added working sessions and committee meetings. If you go down to section B, it has the approval of the minutes of all city council meetings and informational meetings shall be considered at the next regular city council or regular council meeting, and that these minutes are kept in the clerk's office. Then we've changed the word from closed meetings to executive sessions. That is the change there. We do keep, just so you know and the public knows, we do keep 2 sets of minutes, although the minutes for the executive sessions don't have any other, just has the topic, what you had stated when you went into executive session. In those particular minutes, we will record who is in the room while that executive session is ongoing. And I think that's about it, just the topic and who was in the room. And that's a separate set. We have, on the regular set of minutes for the informational, that includes that vote, the outgoing when you adjourned out of executive session, and all of those procedural things. But the only thing that difference is that we include, exactly who's in the room for the executive session. So that's the difference there. I did have a question prior to that, so I wanted to address that. Any other questions about that? Then we'll move on. Under 2-8 for record of proceedings, it used to say journal of proceedings. The revision is just to change that, to update the word. They're kept in the clerk's office. And then we added council meeting minutes will be available on the city's website for public view, and copies are available from the city clerk's office upon request. And then subsection B of that, just simply updating the words to minutes instead of journal, and executive meetings let's see, the minutes shall be open to public inspection except for the proceedings of executive meetings as permitted by state law. And then under section 2-9, this is reworked a bit, so open to what the council wants to do here. I just felt like part of it was kind of in an odd place. So it says the presiding officer of the city council meeting shall be the mayor. In the absence of the mayor, the acting mayor shall preside at meetings of the council. The acting mayor may vote on all issues. And that's a provision in city charter, and I quote that in the next section, but it says the city council shall designate a council chair and council vice chair to perform the duties of acting mayor pursuant to city charter section 2.03. And that essentially says that you just for the purposes of being the presiding officer, you are in the acting mayor's role. But of course, the mayor doesn't divest any of his responsibilities to be the chief officer of the city into that acting mayor. That doesn't come with this responsibility of presiding over the city council meeting. Anyhow, and then it goes on. The chair and vice chair shall serve as one-year term. The election of the council chair and vice chair shall occur on the third Monday in May of each year. That's actually in a resolution. I just thought it would be better to have it in ordinance. But most of that language really comes from some sections below. It's just moved up. Then it says, if the vice chair is unable to serve as acting mayor, the council chair may designate a council member to serve as acting mayor in his or her absence. That is new in terms of if the vice chair is unable to serve, the council chair is the person that we have put in here to designate the person who will be acting mayor. Again, up to you folks what you want to do with that. Again, the presiding officer, rather than mayor, shall preserve a strict decorum or strict order and decorum at all regular special meetings of the council and confine members in debates to the questions under discussion. The presiding officer shall announce the decision of the council on all subjects. In section E, the city clerk or assistant city clerk shall state every question coming before the council and shall serve as the parliamentarian for the council. That is kind of what is done now. The mayor doesn't state the title. Usually he has the assistant city clerk read that into the record, and then he takes that main motion on to discussion by the council and then presides until it is kind of returned when he'll announce the vote. Then it comes back to the assistant city clerk. So that's kind of how it's done now. And finally, the mayor shall vote only in the case of a tie, his or her name being called last, and that's the end of the revisions in that section. Any questions or comments? All right, I'll move along faster. Yes? Call to order again. This is really just adding some words, housekeeping. I'm going to, as you can see, I'm going to skip that. In roll call, we've just simply added that we record the names of those who are present and absent. We do that now, so we're just updating this. On the agenda, this is a bigger section, and it has implemented pretty much what the council staff does now. We have that Monday 10 a.m. deadline for items that come before the council for your consideration at the 7 o'clock meeting. And if we have a holiday, it comes at 10 a.m. on the preceding Friday. As you all know, we always require all the documentation in terms of the legislation that you're going to be voting on to be submitted with that within that deadline. We then prepare that and then get that to the public and to the council by 1 p.m. on Wednesday. So that is kind of what is done. In addition, and maybe we'll stop after this section if that's the will of the committee. This last one is, and I quoted some state law in here. This is about when the council adds an item to the agenda after the deadline, which we have done. Of course, if you add it after the deadline and it's an ordinance, you're required by state law to have 2 readings. So I didn't even put that in there because obviously that's going to override our city ordinance. But in terms of a resolution, I wanted to clarify that if you wanted to take action on that item, it probably should have something that would be to the public safety and health and welfare of the city. And so I used the language of, and I think it's 919, pardon me, wrong set of notes, 919.13. And so that language after, unless consideration is necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, or safety, or supporting of the municipal government and its existing public institutions, that all goes on. That's all quoted from 919.13, and in part, that's the statute that deals with the effective date of resolutions and ordinances. It's called an emergency clause, is how we refer to that. But those are those things that need immediate action and we forego the referendum period on that by state law. So that's all we'll address, given the time, if you have any comments or questions about that section.
I'll move to adjourn.
A second, please.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.